Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Bartlett. I'm Iain Borden. I'm Vice Dean Education here. I am your compere for tonight. This is a fabulous night. I'm going to wait. It's one of those great nights that you look forward to because it's fab. Why is it fabulous? Because we have a fabulous author. Stand up, Sabina. Straight away. Sabina is postdoc fellow in Cities and Urbanism at the University of Melbourne's Centre for Cities. She previously did her PhD here at the Bartlett. I know lots of you know her already. She's fabulous. Welcome back to London. We have a fabulous book. Urban Surfaces, Graffiti and the Right to the City. You can buy a copy of this book at 40% off, I think, afterwards in the foyer where we will be drinking and conversing afterwards. So make sure you look at this. It's got colour pictures. The text's not bad as well. So I really highly recommend it to you for reasons that will become apparent this evening. Why else is this evening fabulous? Because we have a fabulous panel of people who are going to respond to this wonderful book or to different chapters from it. And I am going to just get my notes. So we have Dr. Rebecca Ross, who is going to respond to Chapter 1, Surface Semiotics. So each person is going to respond for about 10 minutes, I think, to each of the chapters. Rebecca is Director of Graphic Communications Design Programme at Central St Martin's. She's also the co-founder and co-editor of Urban Pamphleteer, which many of you, I think, will know, which is published in collaboration with the UCL Urban Lab. So welcome, Rebecca. We also have, responding to Chapter 2, Beyond Art and Crime, Dr. Rafael Schacter. He's an anthropologist, he's a curator working on public and global art. He currently heads the world-leading materials culture section at UCL's Department of Anthropology. He himself has published 3 books on graffiti and street art, and his most recent book is about to come out with MIT, Monumental Graffiti. Welcome, welcome. Chapter 3, Law and Graffiti. We have a particular specialist in that area, Dr. Enrico Bonadio, who is Reader in Intellectual Property, IP at City University, and he's the author of Copyright in the Street, an oral history of creative processes in street art and graffiti subcultures, which came out with Cambridge University Press last year. Welcome, Enrico, welcome. And then we also have Dr. Susan Hansen, Europe's most cited street art scholar, interdisciplinary academic, co-editor of Visual Studies and Vice President of the International Visual Sociology Association. Susan's going to respond to Chapter 4 on Leek Street, which some of you will know, sometimes known as the Graffiti Tunnel in London. So the way this is going to work is Sabina's going to come up and say a few words about her fabulous book. Our fabulous panel are going to respond. We are not then going, I think, planning to do questions. We'll see. We might have a little bit of time to what that we then want to do. The other reason why this event is fabulous is because you are all here, and we'd like to be able to, everyone to go and have a drink and talk with each other outside and have fabulous wine and conversation, and you can all buy a copy of the book as well, if you haven't already done so. So, welcome to the Bartlett. I wasn't going to say this, but I am going to say this. It's lovely to have Sabina back. Sabina did her PhD with her. She's been in Australia. She's come all the way back to London to do this book launch. She'll be travelling around the rest of Europe. But I think it's just it's just lovely to have her back and to do this book launch at the Bartlett. So welcome, Sabina.
My copy of the book. Hi. Thanks for coming. Thanks. So I struggled a lot with my notes for tonight, and I started taking the notes, thinking about the past, and about the many years that this colorful little object was in the making. And I was thinking how I arrived here in 2011 to start a PhD with Iain and with Ben. Ben, where are you? I just saw you. And then the very cumbersome object that resulted from that, which was my thesis, and it was nothing like this. Cost a lot of money to print as well. So did this. And then I was thinking when Susan, who we'll hear from, told me before the PhD Viva, the PhD exam, to stop being nervous because this was not about me. She said it was about the work, and I was here to do the work justice. And about the tens of thousands of photos that I've taken since, and working and thinking and befriending the most wonderful people, and the most badass thinkers here, hundreds of student essays and dissertations, and some of them are listed in the conclusion, and how deeply meaningful all of this has been to my life, and how surreal it feels tonight to be here and to stand here with my respondents and with all of you, as we have many times throughout the years, in academic context, in public context, in fun context, but never over this. So, thinking about how much these guys have done to advance our thinking about urban spaces, graffiti, visual discourse, and the ways in which cities communicate and are made through their public walls. And then I was thinking about the book. I thought I would read from it to convey some of the passion I have for this work and how I don't know how to research and write in any other way that is not passionate. I keep saying and writing that surfaces have taught me everything I know about cities. Navigation, territory, visibility, language, politics, bodies, methods, conflict, materiality, property, descent, and life. But surfaces also taught me many things about myself and my position in the world. And most obviously and literally, when I say my position, I moved to Australia for this, right, a year ago. But also about the point of all of this. Why do we do this? Research, writing, publishing with mega corporate names like Routledge, strategizing for academic careers, like what's the point? So I think the best thing I can do, before you find out more about the book itself, which won't be from me, that's why we have our respondents tonight, is to point to some of my most recent lessons from surfaces, which are my reason, they're my fuel, and they're my determination as well. A project for urban visual justice, to examine the ways in which publicly displayed images in cities articulate values of belonging, representation, and contestation. The Surface Commons, which gives innovative ways of conceptualizing private property and public use, the production of space, and new legal imaginations of public space, which are super relevant in this school particularly, I think. Semiotic atmospheres, to unpack how experiences and presentations of urban spaces are created through their semiotic landscapes and surfaces, so the signs of cities, how they create atmospheres, and how important these are. Public graphic heritage. All public signage and inscriptions constructions should be recognized for their cultural value as archives of urban cultures. Think about the implications of this if we actually started to do this. And finally, the optimism that comes from observing how surfaces continue to be used and occupied across the world for defiance, empowerment, and the affirmation of rights to the city, including in places, which are most places, where the communicative function of public surfaces is surveilled, policed, and curated. Cities are never unanimous, harmonious congregations. We all know this in this room. And neither are their public surfaces. They're also bastions of resistance, radical politics, and competing claims to urban rights. This is what I try to capture in the book. Protest signs, graffiti tags, posters, and stickers are social infrastructure. And the right to the city is the right to the surface. If you pick up the book and you go to the end of the conclusion, you'll see there's a manifesto that is written around this. You're about to see a loop of images here. So what happened was, after the book came out, I started taking it with me everywhere. I was about to say, I never leave the house without it, but seriously, like today I did. So what I've been doing was, like, I just go out with a book and I place it everywhere in the city, like it becomes an urban object, and it becomes one of the voices that it speaks about in the city. So what, I check where I can fit it, what's its scale, how can I prop it, and I'm going to quote my now friend and research partner from Melbourne, Chris Parkinson. When he first saw these photos, he said to me with such great clarity, he said, Sabina, you know what you're doing here, right? He said, these are self-portraits. And it prompted me to think that all the work we do in places like this is a form of self-portraiture, maybe. The research, the fabrication that happens in this building, the writing, the imaginative design work, they're all self-portraits, as much as they are portraits of our worlds. They teach us about ourselves as much as they do about our environments. And that's daunting and wonderful, and this is why, this can only be personal. It's always going to be personal. But I hope you take away the work and you run with it and you make it of you and your own worlds. That's why it exists. So Rebecca, you're next. I'm going to start the loop.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Sabina, for inviting me to join the event and to celebrate the launch of your fabulous book with everyone here. So I always ask specifically to respond to the first chapter, which is titled Surface Semiotics, a Manual for Knowing Surfaces, by providing a few words about the content of the chapter, making some connections with my own work, as well as identifying some directions for future research. So I'd like to say that the chapter brings together an extremely eclectic, and this is eclectic in a surprising and excitingly interdisciplinary way, range of scholarship. It has been as if a bunch of folks have been at a party together, milling around, checking one another out, but not quite making eye contact or summoning up the courage for conversation until now. Some heavy lifting was involved in bringing together multiple contemporary forks of semiotics, urban semiotics, landscape semiotics, geosemiotics, in a way that enables, for example, W.J.T. Mitchell to be in more direct conversation with both Henri Lefebvre and Sylvia Levin about the agency of walls. The assemblage echoes Sabina's own description of city surfaces as an assemblage of publicness. And you didn't read from the book, but I picked a small quote from page 41. It is the multitude of perspectives captured and displayed by city surface writing which created an unprecedented sense of publicness, and I believe continues to do so today. Somehow, in the critical mass of discrete private interests, the city writes its story, weaving all our threads into a narrative of publicness and belonging, which is inscribed on its ever so generous walls. I love the use of the word generous there. I think this is like the key word to the attitude, I think, that you were just describing that is important to you in the book. It's also important to say that the chapter is underpinned by really well-honed instincts regarding the immediate street-level experience of urban citizens. All of the photographs featured in the book are Sabina's own photographs. There's also some absent images, but that's a whole other discussion. But I understand that these photographs come from an extremely, you can kind of tell when you're looking at the book that the photographs are drawn from like a massive database of photographs, and now we're only seeing like a small crust of them. But the photographs I really appreciate how they add a layer to the argument, but they also demonstrate the way in which Sabina is constantly and exhaustively, and I would even say like relentlessly, sort of checking, rechecking, and complicating her arguments by passionately attending to what's there, that's announcing itself to us immediately all the time that we're not paying attention to. And I think the photographs just kind of keep underlining everything, and it's really nice to see the dialogue between the text and the images. So I encourage everyone to spend time with the images as they make their way through the text. So chapter 1 is sort of, it sets the stage for what becomes a closer empirical focus on graffiti and street art in subsequent chapters. But it does so in a way that has relevance to a wide range of subject matter. So I just thought to finish, I would contribute a few scenarios from my own work and travels that also fit into the discussion that is being framed, and are not about street art and graffiti necessarily, but indicate some potential directions that are hinted at by the text, which could be further discussed or explored. So I'm going to just describe 3 things. So one of them is a scene from 2016. I was walking, this is December 2016. I was walking across the Shepherdess Walk foot cycle bridge across the Regent's Canal, and there was a red powder-coated aluminum sign, you know, those typical municipal signs, and it had been there for a long time. I think it had been there for at least a year, maybe 2 years, and it read road closed in white, in large all-caps sans serif. I'm sure you've all seen signs such as this. However, there were 2 things that were new because I had been walked by that sign several times. One is that the construction work finally looked complete. So this is the regeneration of the Packington estate. The construction work finally looked complete with all the hoarding removed, and it appeared that the sign was just out of date because it didn't look like the road was closed anymore, like you couldn't see a closed road. However, the other new thing was a piece of scrap cardboard taped with packing tape to the side of the sign, which said, "You cannot get through," with an exclamation point, triple underlined through in blue marker. And it was just like a piece of cardboard. What was interesting is the way that I was really ready to ignore the official red sign and completely zone out from it, but actually really trusted the cardboard sign with the magic marker. And I think that this perfectly illustrates some of the optimism and some of Sabina's points about the collision of official and unofficial urban texts, and I would add typographies to that because I think typography is connected here. And it also suggests to me the potential for further thinking about the different voices we encounter in cities, and often they're typographic, how and why they become signals, or why they remain noise, or how they become noise. And I think that that could be picked up for further consideration. Okay, number 2, I promised 3. So during 2015, I staged a project on some digital billboards around central London, and it was related to housing and displayed short texts about housing contributed by participants over the internet. So the billboards were photographed early on in the project, and the photographs were shared widely on social media, and they garnered a lot of attention all over the world. Because most people never actually saw the billboards in person, many assumed that the images were actually created in Photoshop rather than photos of the street. And this is to the extent that a Conservative candidate for Mayor of London contacted me to offer me the opportunity to actually realize my project if I would help him with his campaign. So that's just, like, people just didn't know that they were real. And I was surprised by the extent to which the photos shared on the internet were so much more visible than the billboards themselves, which were up for 2 weeks. And I guess I'd also be interested in how some of Sabina's thinking applies to electronic and network displays or dynamic media more generally. I feel like there's a space to talk about light here, and seeing more and more of those displaced. So I'm interested to see how the framework laid out in this chapter could apply to those kinds of surfaces. And then this is my third scenario. So this one's slightly personal, but I also have been thinking about it in relation to my work. So I'm just going to share it anyway. Last winter, Hackney Council were cleaning up graffiti on the exterior wall to my building, right on the other side of the long wall to my living room, which is a single layer of bricks and the biggest point of heat loss in my flat. And they decided to power wash the graffiti. These are bricks from 1970. They decided to power wash the graffiti and ended up going all the way through the bricks, right into the flat. It was lovely. The moisture took hold in the wall, and it created a significant amount of mold to the point that the bricks basically needed to be repointed, and the wall needed to be repaired. And I needed to negotiate a lot to get that to happen. But the kind of the things I wanted to point out about this is really, in the first place, this is an example of a wall that is not thick enough. And like many council buildings all over the UK, it needs a layer of insulating render or something similar. I don't know the details, but if the building's ever going to be switched over to greener forms of heating, the wall will need to be made thicker. And I think these kinds of conditions and questions about the changing relationships between walls and climate would be particularly productive to explore using a bit of the end of the first chapter, which I encourage everyone to jump straight to, which is it's a sort of example of a method called a wall interview that Sabina tries out in the book. So this is sketched out in the conclusion of the first chapter, and I'd love to interview a wall about the way that the climate is changing. So I think that's it for me. I will pass it on to the next person, and thank you again for inviting me to join the conversation.
So Dr. Rafael Schacter is going to respond to the chapter on art and crime.
Thanks. Can I move this?
Yes, thank you.
Is that going to just work?
Is it?
Yeah. So if I try to again, it will probably break, so I'm going to leave it. Okay, I'm going to pin this to myself. Hi, everyone, to all the humans. Hello, humans. Okay, can you hear me? It's okay? So I'm going to have a little anecdote about one of the first times I met Sabina, which was, I'm thinking about passion, the word she used, at one of the most amazing conferences that has ever taken place on graffiti in London at the South Bank in 2013. So it was an incredible conference with an amazing lineup of speakers. It was really quite outstanding. And also occurred that day one of my favourite ever moments in doing ethnography on graffiti, which was when 10 Foot, one of the most infamous graffiti writers, probably the biggest graffiti writer in the world, stood up as as Detective Colin Cecil, who is, probably was the most famous, infamous police officer who targeted graffiti writers and spent about 5 minutes just lambasting him. And it was the most incredible, spine-tingling moment in what otherwise, from Colin Cecil, was an incredibly disappointing talk. I was really excited that Colin Cecil was going to get up there and, like the classic cops and robbers, he would know the most about graffiti writers than anyone else in the world. He was the ultimate ethnographer. And unfortunately, his first slide was of a hooded boy with a baseball bat. And I was like, this is sadly going to have no ethnographic veracity at all, which did not. I want to thank Sabina for that moment. So the chapter I'm going to be talking about today is chapter 2, Beyond Art and Crime, a critical history of graffiti and street art. I am going to be reading quite a lot from this chapter on behalf of Sabina. And this chapter is taking a look at the history from the emergence of what I would call capital G graffiti. Graffiti as emerging from the 1960s in the East Coast of the States, and the way this moved all over the world as probably the most practiced form of public art in the world today, and then moved into what we now call street art, with a very capital S and capital A, as a very commodified and corporatized culture. So the chapter starts off, it has 11 sections, which I'm going to briefly talk through. First, wall writing as a time portal, which really cleverly looks at the way that, as Sabina said, control is asserted by renaming. So looking at the way graffiti as a term, street art as a term, emerged over the chapters, and the way that when the graffiti as a term was first used, it was not as a pejorative, and it's only its ongoing criminalisation that turned it into its pejorative term today. The second chapter, graffiti, second section, sorry, graffiti is only a name. So this section looks at terminological contestations or contentions, and again looks at the way that actually within graffiti the term was writing. It was writing and you were a writer. Graffiti was an etic term, not an emic term. So it starts to look at the way that these terms that are used and that we come to utilise actually have to be looked at ethnographically, specifically, to really understand how they become not simply hegemonic terms, but become used to define what these genres are. Then taggers collective. So I was thinking, what is this? Every tag is collectively authored. I was like, is this going to be thinking about graffiti as like a discipline which isn't singular by the author? It's about a multiple kind of collective act. It was actually, as I understood it, about the relationship between artists and authorities. The way in which the city is made and the images of the city are made not just by the artist, but by the constant reflexive relationship between artist and authority. So, quoted here, instead of reducing the incidence of graffiti, authorities' clampdown led to a decrease in quality and a feeling of hostility among writers who are now competing for a more limited and harsher painting environment. So seeing the social space, the physical space in which graffiti is produced, being a constant reflection between artist and authority. Likewise here, this brings me back to graffiti, says Sabina, writing as being the result of a combination of efforts intending to produce, contain, suppress, popularise, and guide public discourse around the practice. I've written yes in big capital letters there. So the next section, section 5, is fear is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, looking at the war of images, the war on graffiti that emerged, and the way this war was cleverly utilised as a way of moving the discourse away from what was entrenched problems of funding, entrenched issues around security, and focusing instead on a much easier target. So Sabina says the first war against graffiti and the ones that followed were fought on many fronts and with incredible resources in a city which had just narrowly escaped bankruptcy, which is New York, and was in a very precarious economic and social situation. In this context, graffiti was not just marks made on the subway trains by the city's youth, but was turned into a symbol for neglect, degradation, and fear of crime, a sign that authorities were losing control of the city and were leaving it in the hands of destruction-bound adolescents. So the crime of graffiti, Sabina continues, became more than a crime against property. It was a danger to the psychological well-being of subway riders, a trigger for destruction and chaos in an urban landscape which had spiraled out of control and seemed almost impossible to recover. So really this incredible way, the war on graffiti, the unwinnable war, as Sabina goes on to mention, in which this war over images was about not just over the image of graffiti, but the public image of the city. So, section 6, gallery walls redeem urban walls. So here we have this moment in the 80s where graffiti starts to become a gallery art, starts to move from the walls of the city to the walls of the gallery. So this, in a term I really liked here, was eliminating unpredictability. So in the case of graffiti, this meant eliminating not only its defying, quote, unpleasant and unpredictable claims of the city, but also extracting specific visual forms and packaging them as exponents of a controlled and sanitized artistry. Also, a section I really enjoyed here was the way in which the art world needed this feeling of illicitness that graffiti kind of symbolized, but didn't want in any way to protect the artists who were still participating in it. So, quote, the art world needed graffiti to remain the criminalized activity that it was to maintain its street cred and offer it just the necessary twist to make sales. Austin bemoans the fact that galleries did not lobby against the war on graffiti as their artists were getting arrested and media vilification campaigns were in full swing. I really like that section, that kind of the way in which, from that early era in the 80s when graffiti was becoming There was just enough criminality to create sales, but not enough to support the practice. And this actually also led to thinking about the emergence of street art as what was really at that point in the kind of late 70s, mid-70s, and early 80s, as what was a form of community art practice. A kind of popular, public, community-based, maybe mural culture, but the way that it was framed actually totally ignoring the fact that the graffiti writers, the writers in that city at that time, were doing a very, very similar thing in a non-institutional setting. So, quote, the plea for involvement and collaboration was also problematic as it never discussed how graffiti writing was fulfilling this exact same mission only in a completely non-dependent way. So instead of waiting to be called upon to participate in something that they felt might not represent them, young people took to their neighborhoods themselves and created a collaborative, creative movement as a response to the bleakness of the city. Despite this, graffiti was never nurtured, encouraged, or funded by more traditional fine art wall painting, even though they were contemporary phenomena sharing similar spaces. So this, what Grant Kester would call kind of evangelical kind of aesthetics, this way that community art and street art in that early era was seen to be about creating community, often in a very top-down sense, and totally ignoring the fact that this was occurring under their very noses. Section 8 was the image is not on the wall, and this is about the movement, as I understand it, again from the image of street art as it started to proliferate in the 90s, not simply to be on the walls, but in books and on websites, the way in which the transmission of these surfaces became mediated within a much more kind of globalized sense. The next section, section 9, authoritarianism comes in beautiful colors. So I definitely kind of felt this section a lot. I've got numerous quotes here. Here, really thinking about the way in which beauty is used as a way of hiding ugliness, as a way of hiding what's happening in the city through a very kind of thin veneer of paint. And actually here's where we have the lack of images that Rebecca noticed, which I absolutely love. These are my favourite images in the book, I've got to say. So there's a section of 4 pages in which the images that Sabina wanted to display could not be displayed. And this is self-explained in the figures. So in figure 2 it says, the individual artistic value of one inscription blocks the collective value of many inscriptions, which is a recurring theme of this book. So because there was one image in the image that was subject to copyright law, the whole potentially subject to copyright law, the whole image could not be displayed. Or likewise, in the next image that can never be seen, these murals have valued themselves into invisibility. So put the book down, go out, and enjoy your local mural portraits directly. I was a large fan of that. So yes, here thinking about the way in which these images were becoming slowly more corporatized, more commercialized, and what was a focus on beauty, on an aesthetics which was solely about surface rather than about depth. Next section, urban creativity is a well-oiled machine. Here became my new favorite term, which is street artness. So the instrumentalization, quote, of street art, for it to happen, a consensus needs to be formed about its value, Sabina says, which must be acknowledged and endorsed by several relevant institutions. I will call this measure street artness and define it as a cumulative set of features that make a surface inscription valuable to the legitimate world of street art. A discursive construct which surrounds the inscriptions, a form of collective endorsement by the street art world, which affords strategic powers to decision makers and offers them a hook to promote their values and implement their agendas. So this then moves on to the penultimate section, the final section, which is street art sold my city. Here, the street itself, Sabina says, becomes a symbol of authenticity. Its materiality bearing the silent traces of inscriptions whose disappearance only rendered them more iconic. So here we have this kind of full corporatization of street art, in which the city formally uses these images. So not just passively letting some images exist and others be removed, but actively engaging quote-unquote street artists to fulfill the needs of the creative city. So a kind of very classic mode of public arts relationship with gentrification, in which slowly and surely every city will look the same until it's finally painted white. I really enjoyed this section, something you can see all over the city. In my, I didn't want to mention my new book because this is your launch, but I talk about Croydon. In my lectures, I talk about Croydon and the way you can see the description that Sabina has here being perfectly replicated in Croydon. This creative city trifecta of councils who are increasingly impoverished and desperate for some sort of creative lift, gallerists who are equally eager to find public space to promote their artists, and property developers who want to create a new, edgy, cool, who come together to create this new veneer of street art. And in that Croydon example, both council, property developer, and gallerist have now all gone bankrupt. So probably not the best move. So it's a very enjoyable chapter, really kind of looking at the scope of these changes that have happened over what is now the last 50 years. For me, in terms of like the next kind of space in which I really encourage people to be researching, in which I'm starting to do some small research myself, is on community muralism, is on public muralism, which very deservedly gets a very bad rap in this chapter. What I would call neo-muralism as a practice in which there is no relationship to site, there is zero site specificity. It's all about the artist's own needs being placed in a very public context. So, that way in which we are forced to see things which have no relationship to community, which have no relationship to a public at all. But there is such a rich history of muralism, both in the UK and further afield, which I feel has totally, not been entirely missed, but which definitely art history has totally written out of the canon. So I feel that era of kind of community muralism and public muralism is really ripe for study and is necessary in a moment where we have the public muralism and public art that we do today. So thank you, Sabina.
Thank you, Rafael. I'm going to pass straight over to Enrico Bonadio, who's going to respond to the chapter on law and graffiti. Enrico.
Wherever, maybe here. This doesn't work. Okay, thank you so much. Thanks, Sabina. Thanks for the invitation. It's better here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really excited to be here. And Rafael said when we met 10 years ago at the conference at City University when Alison Young was presenting her books, already 10 years. Then throughout the years we exchanged opinions, ideas about graffiti and copyright. My expertise is about copyright law, intellectual property law. And so of course I was asked by Sabina to give some comments on chapter 3, right? But I was so curious that I also read the other chapters. I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist. So I really enjoyed the other chapter as well, the one on Leek Street, and Susan will give us some comments on Leek Street. Just an anecdote. Last month I went to Leek Street and I found an American diner. I had a burger and they charged me £50 for a burger and took a couple of pints. Maybe we can talk about that later in your comments. So, but let's stick to chapter 3, right? To the legal issues. But first, before doing that, I just want to do a general comment on the main argument of the book. Not the right to the surface amounts to the right to the city. I agree with that. Why do we preserve prehistoric graffiti in preserve modern graffitis. This is a paradox. I mean, which has also been highlighted, I think, by Banksy in a stencil, right? When there is this guy who whitewashes Hansen graffiti from Pompeii or something like that. But let's stick to chapter 3, no? About legal issues. I mean, in the chapter, Sabina tells us that these legal consequences the graffiti writers face because of their criminal activity are too tough, right? Are too tough, and we know that. In my own ethnographic research, I interviewed graffiti writers who spent years in jail, right? And it's a tough experience for them. And probably it's true. These laws are too severe, too strict. They are often based on a flawed theory, which is the broken windows theory. And again, Sabina tells us that this is a theory which is empirically flawed. I mean, before you, again, Alison Young has already told us that this theory has to go because it doesn't have roots in reality, I would say, right? Many writers, street artists, more writers than street artists, I would say, have a criminal record, right? Which, however, also judging from my personal experience talking to these guys, it's not just a negative thing for them. So what these guys, what these convicted writers often try to do is to turn a negative experience in an opportunity, right? So some of them highlight the fact that they have spent time in prison to strengthen their CV, to enrich their CV. It's not a paradox, it's like this, because in this crazy world outside the subculture, of course, I'm thinking about fashion, industry, about other edgy or, controversial areas, having a criminal record might be an asset in some specific circumstances. And of course, these guys think, okay, I paid my duties, I paid my bill with justice, right? And now I want to take advantage of what I paid. And this has also come out from my own interviews, right? Several writers, they highlighted this. They are not worried, not even when they told me about their experience in jail, they kind of accepted that as, most of them, as a natural consequence from their daily activities, right? And of course, some of them, many of them, have tried to get advantage and to use this experience to get opportunities also outside the subculture, right? With contracts, marketing, and so on and so forth. Some of them, they even told me that, even if my mural is illegal, I want still to enforce copyright if I can. So the illegality of the work should not jeopardize the legal protection of it. Several writers and street artists confirm that, right? But as already been anticipated by Rafael, this chapter 3, like many others, like the others, does have this provocation. I call it a provocation, right? Where is the picture here? Sabina could not show the picture because the publisher probably was concerned about the lack of consensus, the lack of authorization from both the photographer, but the photographer is you, right? But and the artist, no? And so it was last April 23. I was in Jamaica doing my sabbatical, not on holiday, sabbatical, making research. I had an email from Sabina, from Melbourne. Enrico, I need to talk to you. I have a problem with my publisher. What's going on, Sabina? And please, let's have a call. So we managed to have a call on Zoom. Sabina, what's going on? Look, I have many pictures that I want to put in the book, but the publisher is so strict, it doesn't allow me to publish all the pictures I want. And this is a book about urban surfaces. How is it possible? And I told Sabina, welcome to the club of copyright pessimists and copyright opponents. not total opposite, but I had to explain to Sabina, look, this happened with my book as well, which I was about to publish with Cambridge University Press. I had to remove all pictures, most of them taken by myself in several towns of the world, because the publisher would not accept, especially those pictures whose artist is unknown or where I could not get the authorization. So I had to remove them, and I had to tell Sabina, yes, look, nothing we can do. This is the way, unfortunately, copyright is regulated, and some publishers, especially, academic publishers, those which want to avoid any risk, usually push, authors and writers to renounce, to waive, to give up on using these images, which is a paradox when we talk about a book about urban surfaces or graffiti and corporate mind. But it's totally insane. That's why I like Sabina doing this provocation. I mean, where is the image? There is no image. And in another part, he also says, which is I found very, very interesting. This is a surface displaying another colorful. Where is the color? That's what she imaged. Colorful, oversized portrait of a woman painted on a wall. Out of all the images that were planned for this book, the ones you are deprived of seeing are mostly the figurative, beautiful ones. And I really like this sentence. The ones you are deprived of seeing, right? So copyright here is depriving people, is preventing people from seeing images of a surface in a book which is about urban surfaces, which doesn't make sense. So I like this provocation. I think it's the first time I saw something similar, right? And depriving the right to the image in this context is the same as depriving the right to the city. So your readers are not able to share the same experience you shared and the same experience which triggered you to write this book, right? So I think this would be a perfect case study for our policymakers who write copyright laws in a way which represent a paradox, right? And this is not just for writers of literary works such as books. Think of documentaries, right? Documentaries where for example, music documentaries. Again, when I was in Jamaica last year, a friend of mine from America, what he did is to put together images, videos he took about Jamaican artists playing at gigs, very rare images of 20, 30 years ago, to make a documentary. He could not do that. He's not able to do that because he's not able to gather all the authorization. And this overprotection of copyright, this epitomizes, let's say, this case epitomizes the flaws our copyright laws have. So copyright is supposed to encourage creativity, right? And to enhance the dissemination of creative works. As the US Supreme Court said many times, copyright is the engine of free speech, right? But what the heck is this? Is this encouraging creativity? Is this encouraging dissemination of visual works? We are deprived, as Sabina said, we are deprived of a colorful image. So, with your permission, Sabina, in my next papers on copyright, I will take this as a case study to push an argument which I have always been pushed in, right? To relax copyright laws in order to make them play the role they were designed for, which is incentivizing creativity. So this was my last comment. So thank you so much again for inviting me.
Thank you, Enrico. For the avoidance of any doubt, not every image in the book is blank. There are some
but the
other...
most colorful one, yes.
But the most colourful one is blank, yes. Just let Susan plug in.
Susan, the 50.
Oh, I need to plug the mic. Oh, you got it.
I've got the mic. I will pass you the mic.
The $50 booter.
Great. So to respond to Chapter 4, Leek Street, which may or may not be a space which you have encountered yourselves. If you haven't, it's not that far from where we're stood at the moment. Go and have a look. But Dr. Susan Hansen is going to respond to this chapter.
Thank you. For some reason, my hijack of Sabina's beautiful slide loop is only showing up on this side. Don't know what's happening on this side. It's copyright. This side is copyright. Okay, so I thank you for Sabina for inviting me to respond to Chapter 4. I think she might have guessed that this is my very favourite chapter. I think Enrico is a bit jealous. But also because this chapter serves both as a detailed study of Leek Street and as a device that weaves together many of her noticings from the preceding chapters. So it's quite a good chapter to focus on in isolation because it brings... I've got an update notice here. It brings the book together really nicely. Here, through Chapter 4, Leek Street becomes visible as a living, breathing surface commons, in Sabina's words, and a multimodal space of visual and material surfacing. For this audience, Leek Street probably needs very little introduction, especially after Enrico's burger story. It was set up as a free graffiti space in 2008, and for a very long time it functioned as a self-regulatory training ground for countless writers. So a place where the walls have been effectively open and where there have been no restrictions on the quality or the quantity of painting. So in this space, as Sabina notes, the rate of brand new work replacing barely dry, still super new work has been rapid and relentless. It's really difficult to capture the collective creative energy that has existed on Leek Street, but I think that here Sabina comes pretty damn close. Pretty damn close. This is why I wanted to put a slide set up of my own, and I wish it was flashing up on both sides. Many of you will have seen this. This is a gift from just one of the 10 sections of walls that Sabina photographed over 100 mostly consecutive days, although I think some weekends may have not made it. This is, of course, Sabina's 100 Days of Leek Street project, which forms the basis of this chapter. This project has been groundbreaking and influential in a number of ways for many of us. So a decade or so ago, there were a few researchers who were also engaged in forms of repeat photography of city walls and graffiti and street art. I remember seeing Cameron McAuliffe presenting a time-lapse of the legal wall in Sydney, I think in this very building in 2013, and encountering Cassidy Curtis's ridiculously detailed graph art project for the first time, and Notley McDowell's foundational work, and of course Julia Tulke's now decade-plus length documentation of walls in Athens, which is her Aesthetics of Crisis project, amongst many others. But despite a surface-level similarity to other researchers using repeat photography to study graffiti and the life of city walls, Sabina's approach is truly unique. It wasn't till I saw her present this work live that I fully appreciated the kind of radical shift engendered in her approach. You know, initially, all I saw was repeat photography, but then I saw her do this live. I'm surprised you didn't bring this with you.
It's in Australia now.
I was wondering where it was in the world. So I'm not sure how many of you have seen Sabina talk about Leek Street, but one of the things that she regularly does is to bring along a sizable chunk of the surface volumes or the manifold layers of paint from the wall. And watching people's reactions as they first encounter these hefty wall crusts has been illuminating. It seems to me that handling these material artefacts gives people a visceral sense of the warp and the weft and the weight of time, layers of time, a moment of insight into time as geological or archaeological. Indeed, I think this has proved a potent strategy for encouraging folk to appreciate the materiality of temporality, which in turn alters our perception of the apparent ephemerality and impermanence of work on city walls, let alone Instagram. You know, it's blew my mind, actually, Sabine. So, yeah, I've written here, it considerably impacted on my own thinking, but really, it just went bang. Yeah. So she said talk about your own work a tiny bit. I'm not going to do this for long, but this is what is the same and what is different in my own approach to repeat photography, which I have to call longitudinal photo documentation because I work in a psychology department. It has to sound scientific. Obviously, I also document walls over time, though mine are more mundane and suburban. And in my experience, recording and restitching the passing of time tends to reliably reveal what Lachlan McDowell has called a permanently unfinished ecosystem, or in Sabina's terms, an ever-morphing entity. For me, repeat photography works to make available for analysis the ongoing collective visual dialogue on city walls, taking into account, as with Sabina, not just monumental murals and graffiti and all the buffs in between, but the entire spectrum of quotidian urban inscriptions, the whole gamut. So, I mean, this approach is because my original training was in ethnomethodology and conversation analysis, so this seems like dialogue to me. And for me, repeat photography is a means for rendering this asynchronous dialogue, which may occur over days or weeks, visible by accelerating time to capture all of the calls and responses on a wall, much as we would transcribe an audio conversation to facilitate our analysis of the data. So I did repeat photography to facilitate analysis of dialogue. So while our work shares similar means in repeat photography and others have used repeat photography, these are two quite different ends, and this is not a description of what Sabina's work is about. But one facet of Sabina's work which I think provides food not just for scholarship but also for policy and practice, and this is really clear in Chapter 4, is her observation that counterintuitively perhaps the most effective way to activate and enhance the quality of urban spaces for the benefit of their users is by at least allowing, if not encouraging, the unregulated proliferation of images and image responses as forms of collective action, rather than, as conventional creative cities logic would have it, via top-down, formulaic, hyper-designed muralism. So Leek Street is then a critical case study that shows us how urban spaces can effectively resist commercialisation, privatisation and creative control, yet also increase the involvement, participation and sense of ownership and connection of the users of these spaces. In this process, graffiti is crucially positioned as a form of collective spatial production with clear pro-social spatial benefits. And for us in this kind of field of graffiti and street art studies, whether or not we identify as such, this is a refreshing departure from problematic creative cities and broken windows discourses, not to mention the much older pernicious art historical discourses that automatically focus on the production, valorisation and protection of individual images and singular authors or artists frozen in time. Yeah? So, I have reached 8 minutes and 25 seconds and I pride myself on finishing on time. Luckily, I did a short version of this talk because I figured as I'm speaking last, I should do that. So the very many detailed observations made in Chapter 4 are distilled and reflected in Sabina's 5 proposals for learning from Leek Street, which form the conclusion of this chapter. And incidentally, I love the invitational, challenging, manifesto-esque quality of these proposals, both here and throughout the book. I think they really open dialogue, and they work for me. Okay, so I'm going to flash through those without commenting on them because they are really quite brilliant. Each of these could lead to a separate round table. This is a very difficult chapter to summarise in less than 10 minutes. Okay, so each of these has ramifications for all sorts of fields of studies. I think the heritage implications of particularly proposal number 1 are huge and super interesting. The idea that activity could regenerate, what do we need some kind of top-down regeneration for if this works? Okay, number 3, so exuberant. I love the energy of this proposal, the idea that of these democratically victorious layers emerging. Okay, and I wanted to end with proposal 5, which I think is a really important one. in that League Street, following from this proposal, offers a markedly accelerated case study of high-frequency creative activity that empirically demonstrates, in Sabina's words, that it's not the aesthetics of image production, but rather the very collective action of producing images together that enhances the quality of urban spaces. But what exactly do we mean by quality here? Whose assessment of quality should we follow, and for what ends? Here it's of note that Sabina's definition of quality encompasses both quantifiable forensic metrics, such as a significant drop in crime and antisocial activity in the space, but also more elusive, softer, pro-social outcomes, such as involvement, participation, and a sense of ownership and connection. And it's here that Chapter 4 ends with the following provocation, which should give pause to those attempting to design open spaces that actually invite participation. There we go. I'm going to leave this here.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Enrico. Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Rebecca. This is not a seminar. This is not we're not going to have a discussion, is what I'm going to say. What we're going to do is we're going to go and celebrate. But I just want to pick up, okay, I've written down loads of words. Okay. Network displays, thickness, insulation, climate, generosity, passion, trust, optimism, collision, anecdotes, galleries, community art practice, Croydon, Alison Young, who I think has to be said, theory, criminality, image of the day, street art myths, opportunity, CVs, copyright, provocation, policy making, creativity, free speech, Leak Street, surface commons, rapidity, weft of time, ever-morphing entity, spatial benefits, involvement. Wow. Wow. All of that in Sabina's book, in your fantastic responses. All of this is in this book. Hold it, I've lost the copy. Where's the copy? It's all in here. So I'm going to use that F word again. It is fabulous. Please do go and read it. But also, as Sabina herself started off with, we go from the manifesto that Susan has just shared with us, but also to Sabina as an author, as someone who has, in a way, I think this is also a self-portrait, isn't it? As well as the book in the photographs. So in reading this, you meet street art, you meet politics, you meet all of those words I've just said, but you also meet Sabina. So let's continue with that encounter, and let's go and celebrate. But to Sabina and to this, well done.